If you just want to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you were contracted to do.
Sure, absolutely. I want to begin by thank you for the opportunity to come and present this report.
Yeah, and if you could
Thank you,
speak into
sorry.
the mic, because we are broadcasting this.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and present the findings and the recommendations from this report. Quick introductions for our team. I'm Carl Maupin. I'm the Assistant Director for the Member Engagement and Leadership Services team at the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I have here with me Joe Price, who's a retired Chief of Police and subject matter expert and the team lead for this project. And then Donna Rivera, who's a project coordinator with our team as well. This one.
You're good to go. You can use the buttons or the mouse.
Perfect. Thank you. So just a quick overview for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, or IACP, if you're not familiar. We are a member-based, not-for-profit organization. We have over 30,000 members worldwide, representing over 152 countries. Our commitment is on shaping the future of the police profession, specifically with services that we provide within member engagement and leadership services. We provide professional services similar to this assessment or management study that we've done. We provide executive searches, promotional testing, as well as leadership training, research translation, where we work with the academic community and translate police-related research into practical guides for law enforcement, as well as a policy center that works on model policies as well as consideration documents for law enforcement. And then finally, we have an online repository for research-related articles as well as model policies, sharing with best practices across the profession.
Mr. Maupin, would you be willing to take a question from the council? I know you haven't really gotten into this yet, but
Sure.
Councilmember Mendenhall does have a question.
Seeing as Salt Lake City Chief of Police is a member of your organization, and you're contracted to do an analysis of the operations and management of the organization, and you've mentioned part of your role is in membership retention and probably procurement as well. Will you address whether or not you feel that this, which I assume you don't, feel like it puts you in any sort of conflict of interest, that you obviously want to maintain a relationship with Salt Lake City and our Chief of Police, and yet we've hired you to give a critical analysis of the process and operations. So why your organization, and is it something that you do uniquely, and how does it not present a conflict for us?
Well, from our perspective, it is not a conflict. We're committed more to the profession than to any one individual or specific agency. So our loyalty is to the profession. The findings and recommendations that we have for our reports, we draw on experts from across the profession as well as academia to come in and do an objective analysis. The analysis is designed to come up with recommendations as well as findings and verification of effective practices that are already in place with the intent on improving the police department. So if it's something where there are things that need to be critical, we present those in a way to actually advance the police department as opposed to just providing a positive report. So
Could it not just be effective procedures that are already in place and looking at improvement, but is it, or do you ever identify ineffective processes that are in place and recommend complete?
yes.
I think maybe we have some of that in here.
There's a general mix, but that's usually the similar findings with most agencies, and we do have some that have been very critical and significant changes that were brought about with agencies while we're actually doing studies, not even waiting for the final report. So there is no conflict from our perspective. If it's something regarding the profession, we're loyal to the profession first.
Yeah, and if I can add on to it, Madam Mayor-elect, I participated, my name is Joe Price. I participated in about 6 or 7 of these studies in the last 1.5 to 2 years. And I will tell you from the outset that you have an outstanding agency, not because Chief Brown is sitting next to me, but our analysis and evaluation prove that. Our team comes in on the ground and conducts significant on-the-ground research, interviews, fact-finding, ride-alongs, et cetera. And from that, we developed some initial recommendations. But those recommendations aren't formalized until we literally tear apart the agency's data to make sure that the recommendations are supported by the data that we find. And if they're not, it's not a recommendation. We don't make that. So, for example, if the agency says we need more cops, every agency in the country probably says that. But if they say we need more cops, but your data doesn't support that, we will not make that as a recommendation.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting me put you on the spot right at the beginning. I was an auditor for a time in my past and worked mostly with internal audits for a worldwide company. And so I wonder if we should be thinking of this in some way as an internal audit, but it sounds like the people that you bring in to do the evaluation maybe are somehow more distantly connected to this relationship that you have as leadership of the organization, leadership of our police department.
And I guess if I could summarize, in essence, the purpose of our operational studies are to take a snapshot of where the department is today, or at the time the study began, hear from the department and the community where they want it to go, and help build a roadmap to get from where they are to where they want to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Mendenhall. And then one other question or comment from our Executive Director, Cindy Guest-Jensen.
Just that we have had the opportunity to give input up front and also to follow along the way. And what we found is that the approach and methodology and distance with which this group has approached this is almost identical to the way that we would structure an outside audit with one of the consulting firms that works directly for the council. So it's, I think you have the same level of results, the same professional level of analysis, and the same objectivity that, that we would have no matter whether the client was the city council or the client was the administration in this case. That's our observation. I also asked whether if there are things that the city council wanted to follow up on and the council wanted to, have a client relationship with them, is that possible? And the answer is just like any other audit firm, yes.
Thank you.
Sure. So some of the final parts for the introduction we've already covered, but I'll go over just to make sure we've covered all the points. Is Joe's mentioned, the primary reason that we conduct these audits or these assessments is to recognize effective practices that are already in place, as well as to look for recommendations on how to improve the delivery of police services. So the report itself is both balanced with findings and recommendations, and they're presented in a manner to inform decisions for local leadership. So the format of our report is never one of a department shall do this or it must do something. It's designed to make recommendations to help support those local decisions, as well as respect for the fact that, as Joe said, we have that moment in time perspective of when we looked at the department, we understand that things have changed. Police departments are dynamic organizations and have to change with the needs of the community. So there are changes that occur while we're doing the study that we cannot keep up with. So it's another reason that the recommendations and findings are for consideration to support informed decisions. And then if I could just, we'd like to acknowledge not only the support from the police department to be able to do this study, to give us unrestricted access, not only with the members of the agency, with the sworn staff, as well as the civilian staff, but also with the community, and then also just the initial delivery of this report. This report, we were out here in April of this year, presented the report both to Chief Brown as well as to a meeting of his command staff to actually walk through the report, answer specific questions to make sure that there was complete transparency in the recommendations as well as where we were drawing the data from. And then that was followed by an all-hands meeting for the department itself, where we had over 100 officers and members of the police department that were there to receive the same presentation from Joe and I, as well as to be able to answer any questions regarding the study itself, as well as next steps and directions that Chief Brown had in mind. So. With that, that's the quick overview and introduction, and Joe will go over the recommendations and the background for the report itself.
Thank you.
I'm not going to read the slides to you because I haven't been in y'all's positions. I know it does nothing but waste your time. But the report looked at the agency, and we use this as somewhat of a model for all the agencies that we do, regardless of size. we first establish what the police environment is like. What are the calls for service? What are the crime issues? What are the community issues? And when looking at that, we made 2 recommendations that the department should consider adjusting some of their boundaries for beats and districts to more align themselves with your council districts. Some of the districts are split between 2 patrol districts, and some of the department staff, for example, the community investigation unit, the traffic unit, are often deployed along the council districts. So to some level, it made more sense from a unity of service delivery to the citizens that should be considered. The second part was, in today's world, agencies need to conduct a yearly workload analysis because the fluidity of our environment. It doesn't mean you need to bring in a firm like the ICP or a consultant firm. We are fully confident that Chief Brown and his staff have both the capability and the knowledge to do that. The second area that we looked at was how the agency employs community policing and the tenets of 21st century policing. And I can tell you from the very top of the agency down to the most junior person in the agency, you have a department that is committed to community policing and providing the highest level of service they can to the community. With that said, however, they have a challenge on community policing because the officers don't have the available proactive time to engage the community, develop those levels of partnership and trust that is so critical to that. Now, when I say that, that's at that point in time that we conducted the report. Also critical to that is to develop geographic accountability within the agency so that from the very basic levels at the patrol beat, that community member, that resident knows who their officer is, all the way up to their district commander. Additionally, we encourage the department to establish an organizational climate of strategy, accountability, accessibility, and responsibility in support of intelligence-led policing. Your department has a very robust crime analysis program. Intelligence-led policing says we need to take that data, collect that data, analyze that data, and use that to develop actionable strategies from the chief's level all the way down to that patrol officer. So what it means is, in the future, when that officer has proactive time, they will have data readily available to them to tell them what type of activities is occurring in their area, and through their supervisors, allow them to develop strategies to deal with that. And those are issues that you're probably talking about as far as Part 2 crime that in our earlier discussion this morning, and or quality of life issues that may not rise to the level of statistical reportings of crime, but are still very impactful on your community. Chapter 3 deals with leadership in the department culture. And this, while we clearly realize from your staff and from Chief Brown's staff that this is an issue really beyond this council, it still, I think, is important for us to mention it to you, in that there was significant input from your department's members. And I will tell you, we had over a 90% participation in the surveys we sent out to them, which is extraordinary for that type of participation. But the changes in the retirement system is a major concern to the members of your agency. We know the background on it, et cetera. And our recommendation is for the department to work with you all, not only stress the importance to the state levels, but look, are there alternatives, supplemental programs that could be put in place? Other aspects of that are, and some of these are certainly not unique to Salt Lake, these are across the board in our profession, is to develop performance tools, performance evaluation tools that are unique to the job functions within the PD. A standard HR-type performance evaluation may not accurately reflect the duties and responsibilities of a police officer. We also found that with many of the non-sworn staff within the department, that because of the need to fill their positions within a generic HR descriptor, it does not provide the department the flexibility to not only evaluate them properly, but to provide a career track or movement track for them within the agency. Chapter 4 deals with the organizational structure, and this is how the agency is organized and deployed. You all face a tasking that many agencies today face, in that as the problems we face in the profession, both from the complexity of many crimes that weren't even on anyone's radar 10, 20 years ago, to community issues, there's been a need or a movement to specialize units. Within the police agency, your pot for resources is your patrol function. And so when you are pulling people to create specialized units, you are drawing down your patrol staff and thus impacting your ability to perform your core police functions, responding to calls for service, proactive community policing in the neighborhoods, etc. We suggest that the agency establish a policy and procedure of conducting a cost-benefit analysis for any of their specialized operations, such as Rio Grande. That was a very important one for the community and did achieve some significant public safety outcomes. But from the beginning, our recommendation is before programs like that occur, a cost-benefit analysis should be looked at so that everyone from the chief on down in the agency and the governing body has an idea what the impacts of that program would be. We also talked, getting into some more specifics, about some additional positions that may be needed in some of the specialized units, and dealing with some of the other programs within the agency. I will tell you that when we looked at your use of the mental health professionals in your core program, the social workers, we recognized that and identified that within the IACP circles as a best practice. The ability to deploy that level of sophisticated, trained individuals with those intervention skills is really a best practice in the profession. Now, your challenge is that their workload far exceeds their available time. And so some level of triage needs to occur as to what is the most important, whether it be direct support to patrol officers as they come in contact with people in mental crisis, or dealing specifically with people in homeless encampments, et cetera, that may be in mental crisis, or dealing with other programs that are in place. Probably the lion's share of the report deals with patrol operations and staffing. And when the IACP looks at determining or recommending workload, we look at what is the level of work that is generated by citizen-generated calls. Those calls that an officer comes upon or traffic stops, those are discretionary. Those fall into proactive time. But the citizen-generated 911 calls is essentially the core of our work environment. So we did in-depth analysis as to not only how many calls you had, but how long each call took. And that was important because depending upon the serious nature of the call, it may be one officer, it may be two officers. In some cases, there were multiple officers, 10, 12 officers, because of the serious nature of that call. So the analysis broke down not just the amount of time the primary officer spent on the call, but how much time backup officers were spent on the time. From that, we determined then how much time your officers are actually available. While officers are budgeted for 20, 80 hours work year, very few people actually work that because of leave, because of sick leave, a number of different categories. And if memory serves me, your patrol officer was just about 1,600. I think it was 1,599 was the average workload. And to get that, the department provided us a very detailed analysis of leave usage, et cetera. So when we looked at that, that then gave us the basis for determining how much of your department's, your patrol officer's time is spent handling those obligated calls for service. And as I said, at that snapshot point, 60% of your officer's time was being used for obligated calls for service. Then we looked at how much time of an officer's day has to be spent on dealing with the various administrative tasks, everything from evidence processing to paperwork to supervisory meetings to shift-based training to maintenance on vehicles, equipment. And your department falls right in the model or right in the middle with what we've seen industry-wide, and that's about 30% of the time. Well, that leaves you all roughly less than 10% of an officer's time for that proactive community engagement. So you will see in the report a series of models that we've laid out looking at what percentage the department wants to reach for that obligated time, ranging from a 30 to a 45%. And what that, and in discussion with Chief Brown and his staff, they determined that 45% was the goal for the agency. So what that means then is 45% of an officer's time would be achieved or would be used answering those obligated calls for service. That 30% administrative time would remain the same, but then that leaves you roughly 25% for that proactive community engagement, which is far more effective than where you are today. Now, the report lays out how many officers it would need to get to each of those levels. While numbers can be shocking, I need to point out to you clearly that there are a number of ways to achieve that percentage. One can be add additional resources to the police department, which is obviously a very costly option for you all to follow, and it is also a very long-term option for you to follow. The second can be do reorganization within the agency and allocate more personnel to patrol. That may require reducing some of your special activity capability, but it will add more officers to bring you to that 45%. The third area can be reducing that workload, reducing the number of hours that an officer handles. Now, I just saw your heads pop up like, how do we do that? It doesn't mean those calls for service go away, but there are some calls that can be just as effectively handled by alternate means instead of deploying a police officer to a scene. You have an online reporting system. We recommend that that be enhanced and there be a very robust campaign from the council on down to encourage the citizens about how important it is to utilize this to free up patrol officers for the more serious calls. Additional types of systems can be telephone reporting and even using non-sworn assets to take certain types of reports. So when you see the numbers, I don't want you to walk away with the idea that you're locked into hiring a tremendous amount of resources. There are options and any number of other strategies that can be employed to achieve that. We then looked in another chapter looking at your specific investigators. That's a little bit less clear-cut than the patrol function because no two crimes are the same, no two types of crimes are the same. So what we did was an evaluation of the case assignments per your investigator, once again looked at their workload, how much time they actually worked. They were a little bit higher than patrol. I think they were about 1,650 hours. And then how much, actually analyzing down to how much time they can devote to each case they have assigned. And so the recommendations were based on giving additional resources to provide more investigative time to carry out those investigations. Now, other suggestions in that area deal with other strategies, such as instituting a solvability factor system. In other words, here are certain criteria that are met. That case then goes forward for follow-up investigation. Or those criteria are not met, and at this point, that case is not being investigated. It's a triage system. We then looked at your recruitment, selection, retention, and training. And I will tell you, if there's probably one problem that comes out across every agency that we've looked at, it is hiring the best quality people for your agency. And when you add on to it trying to achieve a population of hirees that are reflective of your community, becomes even more challenging. Your department does a very good job on it. There are some simple recommendations we made, such as better coordinating how the recruiting is happening within the department under one specific office or person, working closer with City of Human Resources to evaluate where your applications are coming from. As important as that is also to make sure you understand why people are leaving. Your agency has a very low attrition rate, which is extremely positive and speaks volumes, I think, for the quality of your agency and its leadership. But by knowing why people are leaving, that allows us to put in place various plans and strategies to eliminate that. Because when you look at the cost and the time it takes you to recruit an officer, that retention program becomes extremely important. We did a cursory review of your policies. They are in accordance with best practices within the industry. We looked at your internal affairs as far as your discipline process. It is a very fair, it is a very equitable, and it is a very timely process that you have. We then looked at your IT. You have a very technologically advanced police department. Our specific recommendation in that arena was more long-term, that as the agency develops more technology, as the community changes, as technology changes, there probably will be the need to have more of a centralized technology management system, technology management unit, and a technology strategic plan within the agency. So that is a very, very quick, and I apologize if I went too quickly, review of our recommendations. There were a total of 61. That certainly is not negative reflection of the agency. It is, as I said in the beginning, the citizens of the residents of Salt Lake, have an outstanding police department. So we'll be happy to address any specific questions that you may have.
Okay, questions or for the consultants? Councilmember Fowler. Okay, Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thank you for that overview. It's actually good because you're putting us back on schedule. You went so fast. My questions mostly are for you, Chief Brown. I wonder what next steps are for you and your team in evaluating the recommendations, deciding which to go ahead with and how to prioritize those. And then what the process is for coming back to the council about the resource allocations that you may need, or the cost savings potentially with some things. I don't know.
Sure.
What does that all look like?
Well, this is. I wish this was one and done, but this is a journey, and it's taken a lot of work. I commend Chief Price and Carl for their efforts that they put into this, because it took a lot of work on everybody's part. When they came into town, we sat down, and when we did the presentation to our officers, they could start to see what this is going to entail. And when Joe pointed out that we had become a strategic deployment agency, that didn't happen by intention. What had happened is, over the course, and I look back over my career since 1991, that's when gangs emerged, and we started to look at ways that we could combat gangs, and so we formed a gang unit, and all those officers came from patrol. I was one of the first members of that gang unit, and it was very effective, so we formed a second, or enlarged the gang unit. Those officers came from patrol. In 2002, prior to the Olympics, we shut down all the freeways, and we forced all the traffic onto our surface streets in our communities. The council and the administration at the time looked at that and said, well, what are we going to do? We needed to up the motor squad. And so we went from 12 to 16 to 26 motor officers. Again, all those people came from patrol. It wasn't the intention to deplete the patrol, but that's what had happened. And so when we sat down and talked with our officers, we said, look, we need to go back to a patrol-centric geographic accountability model. Mayor-elect, I think you mentioned a star pattern. We've talked about that. Officers were going from Sugar House to Rose Park to Glendale. They never had any time to spend in their neighborhood. They knew it, and we had talked to officers about the help they needed. The citizens were waiting 2 and 3 hours for very simple calls. So we basically said, this has to be a program and a process that we need everybody's buy-in, and so we talked with our captains. We've laid it out with the organization on that day, and since April, we have been building that strategy to put back those bodies into patrol. Now, the number we had looked at was about 60 officers to put back into patrol. So our total patrol ranks would be at about 243. That's 243 officers answering calls for service within our community. That's substantially more than we had then, and we have more work to do. But within this process, we've looked at building out 3 different patrol divisions. We thought we'd come up with that idea. Little did we know that they had done that in the 60s. But again, that's going to put more police officers with more command and more accountability in all the neighborhoods. And so it's been more than just an assessment, and this is what we're doing. It's been getting the buy-in, figuring out which squads we could downsize, because some people have to go back to patrol. Now, the 27 officers that we received last year and the 23 that we got this year have been a godsend. They have really helped us, and we've hired those officers. A lot of them are in the academy, and they'll be coming out shortly. But that is where we're going to make up those numbers.
Will you answer my question?
What's that?
Will you answer my question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Say it again, please.
My question, I mean, you brought us up to where we are today. I'm asking you, how are you and your team going to evaluate all of the recommendations, prioritize, and come back to the council with whether or not, I'm assuming there's probably going to be some funding allocations that you'll need to implement some pieces of it. Maybe there'll be some cost savings.
Sure.
But where do you go from here about deciding what to do with, it's more than patrol. There's a lot of recommendations
Right.
here. How do you go through that?
We will go through every one of them. A lot of them we have implemented and done and made some work on it. But every one of those things will be addressed. We value the study and the work. And something that we were talking about earlier is I think that within the work we're doing, I think it would be nice to come back and review the status of the staffing on an annual basis to the council so that we can take this very same formulas that Carl and Joe had used to look at these numbers and different things, apply them again to see where we're at. So I'd like to work through those things as a command staff and as an organization and report back to the council on those issues.
I wonder if right away there's a lot of things that are assessing the current process or deployment, or a lot of internal assessment things. And Chief, do you foresee needing to bring in any additional outside consultants to help conduct all of these assessments of everything from dogs to, I don't know, there's several deeper dives suggested here. Do you think you can do that all internally, or do you not know yet?
Say that again, please.
There's some deeper dives suggested in the recommendations in the couple pages, analyzing the length of dispatch time, revise and update department policies and procedures on, and then I'm just plucking a few out of here. Creating new policies, revising or eliminating policies, evaluating workloads, revising supervisory staffing level, a lot of internal review work.
Yeah.
I'm asking if you feel like you have the internal resources to do all of these recommendations, or do you think that you may need to bring in some additional outside consultants to help implement these reviews?
I think we're on a good track, but I think it's always healthy to look for outside independent review to come in and tell you where your blind spots are. And so I would appreciate that, and I would look forward to looking for subject matter experts that can help us on those things.
And to Chief and Carl, did you highlight, I didn't see any particular areas where you might actually recommend that we use a third party to do those types of evaluations. Are there any that are, more critical that we bring in outside help?
No, ma'am. To my recollection, there's none that jump out because, as I said, we were extremely impressed by the quality of your staff. And part of that is also their ability to not only gather data, but to use data. And so they clearly do an excellent job at that. So our recommendation is, much as Chief Brown said, I would base it on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, you don't want to bring somebody in just for that one recommendation. But if you come to a point where you're realizing this is beyond the capability of the department, or this is beyond the capability of perhaps assistance from other aspects of the city government, then look for that. There are a number of resources that I know the department uses as far as looking at what best practices. Carl talked about the research support and the research data of the IACP that can be used at any time.
And to Joe's point, we did bring in Daryl Stevens, who was an expert to look at internal affairs, our process and review, and he came in and did a study of how we track our complaints and the discipline issued. Another one is we're right now in the process of a CLIA accreditation, which really speaks to the policy because they come in with industry best practices, and that is the bar we're trying to reach. And that, again, that's not just a one and done. This is an accreditation for the Salt Lake City Police Department that we're looking to hold for many, many years. There's very few agencies. I believe there's about 18,000 agencies in this country. Just over 719 have reached a CLIA accreditation. Our auditors are in town even as we speak. They're here for 3 days. They work very closely with IACP, and hopefully in a day or two we'll find out where we're at or what we need to fix, and we're looking for that accreditation also.
That CLIA, those type of evaluations are an excellent tool. I know Chief Brown and staff are working very diligently to get that initial accreditation, but I will tell you from practical experience, that's the easy part, because the reaccreditation is you have to prove you've been meeting all of those standards. So for your department to be pursuing that really speaks volumes for the type of service they want to provide to this community.
If I could just add briefly, within a packet of information that we left yesterday, there are additional resources to include CRITEC, which is our Collaborative Reform Initiative and Technical Assistance. It's a federal grant that offers technical expertise in specific areas. So if there's anything that Chief Brown would feel needs a deeper dive, there are other resources beyond just the ICP that there's also funding available to support.
Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I get a question about in the policy review section, further down here on your slides. Evaluate creating external review boards that provide policy input for the department. Can you explain what you mean by that?
When we do that, we look at industry best practices, and in some cases, that deals with departments that may not have the level of community support or community trust that your agency does. But oftentimes, it's very effective to get input from critical or from community members or also critical support staff within other aspects of the government entity to make sure that all of the I's are dotted, T's are crossed. But additionally, you're getting the concerns of the community you serve.
I guess from Chief Brown's perspective, what are we already doing for this particular thing now? And do you have ideas about moving forward, what things could be added or augmented to this?
As far as policy, actual policies within the department?
Yeah, I mean, external review boards, for instance, those kind of things.
Well, part of this CLIA accreditation is that we went through every one of our policies, and we signed up for a service called Lexipol, which is an outside entity that provides best practices and review of policies, and it comes with the legal staffing and backup to help you through those things. And so we have implemented that, and we've gone through every one of our policies to bring them up to where they need to be. And so, again, that's a continual basis. We've formed an audit squad and a CLIA accreditation squad. Now, they're very small because staffing is limited, and we want to make sure we put those individuals back to patrol. But that is a squad that will keep us on that path and keep looking for industry best practices as far as policies, and then continually to audit and review the different things that we need to within our organization.
Any thoughts about other external review boards you may want to pursue?
Do you have one, Tim?
Yeah. Chief Doubt?
Since it falls to me to implement these things, we are planning on doing that. We triaged all these 61 recommendations, and we're going to get there. We are going to have an external board, citizen review board for our policies. It's just down on the list of ways.
Okay. Thank you for that.
For Wharton.
Thank you. So we talked about the emphasis on patrol and the perception of safety a little bit in our meeting before, but I wanted you to share for anybody that might be watching from the public that I would say somewhat regularly we get people come to the council and tell us, especially from traditionally marginalized communities, that they don't feel that the answer to increasing the perception of safety is to have more officers in their neighborhoods. What additional things, recommendations did you make in your report about trying to address that on a local level?
Well, as we spoke this morning, it's my opinion, but I think it's fairly widely held within our industry. The most effective tool we have in public safety is building trust with our community. And in order to build that level of trust with all aspects of our community, you need to have the ability to create those positive interactions. And by increasing the amount of proactive time you officers have, it gives them the opportunity to be in the neighborhoods more, to meet the individuals, to meet the store owners, to meet residents, and build that sense of not just community, but mutual understanding and trust. The agency has taken great steps in that, but other agencies have gone to the air with other agencies that have a more diverse community than you all, for example, assign specific command officers as the liaison to those marginalized or diverse communities to build that level of trust from the top down.
And that leads me to another question. What about our department in terms of diversity in recruiting and retention?
Once again, we did it at the snapshot time period. Your department mirrored very closely the diversification within the city, except in the area of Hispanic. There was a much higher level of Hispanic general population than within the department. And your department also suffers the same challenges that most police agencies have, but as an industry, we are working very hard toward that, in that our female staff proportions don't necessarily match the general population.
And did you have recommendations on how to improve that?
Councilmember Wharton, it goes right along with the hiring. The goal of any police agency in the 21st century policing is to have the highest quality officers you can that are reflective of your community. That is a challenge. By building those partnerships with the community, you build that trust, and then you build the recommendation. Surprisingly, not specific to Salt Lake, but we have done other studies looking at recruitment, and the best ways to recruit today are not the old advertisements in the newspaper or magazines. Our target cohorts don't use that as a means. They're social media, internet-based. But just as effective is the personal recruiting, the recommendation from people in the neighborhood, recommendation from other employees. I know one of the recommendations that we made to Chief Brown and to, quite honestly, most agencies we deal with is you need to establish a climate in the agency that every single person is a recruiter. So that positive impact, that positive relationship that each and every member of the Salt Lake City Police Department, and quite honestly of the greater Salt Lake government, makes on those citizens, on those residents, builds that level of trust that this may be a career I want to follow.
Okay, and then just last topic really quick, that we also touched on in the meeting, but I think my colleagues and the public might want to hear. We're talking a lot right now about how to do making our parks safer and having whether having a ranger program or whether having officers in our parks. And you talked a little bit about how it might be possible in some instances to use community resource officers or people that you said were unsworn officers or agents of the department. Can you talk a little bit about what other models you've seen in other cities?
Sure. While that was not something we specifically looked at here in Salt Lake, our general recommendation to you is that if you are looking for them to perform law enforcement functions, they should be police. But if your goal is to have them do other functions that are not law enforcement, they may be better placed in a different department, whether under parks and they serve as park rangers or ambassadors or economic development. If you do desire, because of operational control, to have them under the police, some agencies have adopted positions such as police cadets or community services officers that provide a wide range of functions that don't require law enforcement. That, however, will take some time to organize. So our general recommendation is evaluate what are the specific needs you have and then determine what tools are out there best to fill them. A community service officer can do a number of functions, but it will probably take you several years to establish that. Now, a long-term benefit, it could be a recruiting pool for future hires, but you're still looking at a long-term operation in order for that to become an effective program.
Okay, thank you.
Before I go to Councilmember Fowler, I just wanted to give kind of an anecdotal bit of information to Councilmember Wharton's question about recruiting and both racial and gender diversity. My son is participating in the Salt Lake City Police Explorer program, and one of the things that has really struck me that I have found the most remarkable as part of this program is the fact that the majority of the participants in that program are minorities. There's also a very high percentage of females. In fact, all of his, I think his sergeant is female. And, you know, that is something that I wasn't really fully expecting, but it was really, really a positive thing for me. And I think that one of the things that, you know, that hopefully, and I know Chief Brown is working on this, but the more we focus on, you know, our youth and that program in particular, and creating opportunities and making sure that, you know, our youth feel some sort of a bond. And I think that, you know, it's gonna require a cultural change within the department, which I believe is happening. We still have a ways to go, but I think that's really where we're going to be finding, you know, our future officers through, you know, through the youth that are participating in these programs. So it's very anecdotal. There's really no fact to it, but, you know, having watched that program this year, gave me a lot of hope for a much more diverse police force in the future.
Would you care, sir, if I just add on to that real quick? That is the future of our organization. I mean, there are about 90 young individuals that are in our Explorer program. About 75 are in the police Explorer program, and we just started a civilian, because not everybody wants to be a police officer, so it'll be a very nice pool for us to draw upon for many years. But these are individuals from 14 to 21 that spend a lot of time with us, that we're able to mentor and train and teach. But you're absolutely right. That is the most diverse unit within our organization. 2/3 are female. The majority are minority. They speak 12 different dialects and languages. And just for the record, every year they go out and compete in a shooting competition, and every year the females outshoot the males.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Fowler.
It does sound bad. Thank you. So I'm not sure that this is a question so much as perhaps a comment, but one of the things that came up in a discussion I was having earlier today was the types of incidences that we are policing, and looking at where we're kind of spending some of that time. And I would be interested in sort of digging down a little deeper on that, because I have this feeling that a lot of it has to do with some of our communities experiencing homelessness, some of the perceived dangers in the camping. It's just me just like spitballing here. So I'd be interested in looking at really what are the activities that we are policing, and would encourage a further discussion and dialogue around that. And I think this comes down to, for me, and the reason I'm talking about it is sort of it goes not just for policing, but for prosecuting. And, we certainly don't have a say in what Sim Gill, acting as the county DA, can prosecute, but I think we certainly have a say as to, or at least can have a discussion as to what Sim Gill, acting as the city prosecutor, can put emphasis on. And, I was reading an article that in Utah County, the prosecutors listed all of the city code and ranked it from 1 to 5. And 1 was the worst, and what's the Utah County DA? 1 was the worst, and 5 was it's like your petty theft. And he said, we're only going to focus on prosecuting 4 and 5. And these, right now, let's figure out another way. And these are mostly drug charges down here, right? And so decided to, instead of spending all of the time and money on prosecutors, that time and money would go to treatment beds and diversion programs, right? And a real solution to just putting people back in and out of this revolving door in our criminal justice system. And I think similarly, it would be I think those two conversations go hand in hand, and that it would be interesting to see what activities are we policing and spending time where maybe we don't need to spend as much time, and maybe there's another resource that we can put money to, so that we can start that sort of community policing and community building and community trust that we want so much, and that we want people, officers, not attending to these maybe petty thefts. I mean, obviously we want that. I'm not saying that, but kind of looking at those activities, right? And I would love to, Mayor-elect, this is for you, but love to continue this conversation with the administration, the new administration, and really kind of see where are we spending our dollars, and is it fixing the problem, right? That's a big thing. And why we sort of started this discussion with the police department. And we know that we want our police officers just out patrolling, just to be in the community. So how do we do that? And I think starting kind of at that, what are we policing question is something I'd really like to delve into. And then what are we policing, what are we prosecuting, right? And kind of have that overall discussion in the future. So that's just, again, comment, maybe something to kind of mull on, and maybe we can offline talk about some of those things and see how we can move forward with that discussion.
No, Councilmember Fowler, I appreciate your comments. I couldn't agree more. Really, We shouldn't be arresting the problems. We need to solve the problems. And a lot of times we just keep thinking we're going to arrest our way out of the problem, and we can't. So.
Other questions? I have a couple of thoughts. So first off, thank you very much for this information. I think it's very, very helpful. You know, the different scenarios that you laid out on how to move resources and focus resources, that gives me a little bit of concern because I know that anytime we try to play numbers games, there are ways to shift numbers around to make sure that it looks like we're doing our best. One of the things that I've been very, very supportive of Chief Brown on with his leadership is the focus back towards a more community-oriented policing. I think that is something that we've had to do. Now that doesn't mean that we can poach bear the other different units that we have, and it again then comes back to what are the number of officers that we need for the population of the city that we have. And I think that we have to ask that in two different ways, not just the daytime population or the nighttime population, which is our tax-paying residents who are funding the police force, but the daytime population, because what seems to happen is that when you look at the call logs, it focuses on where that increase in daytime population is, which is in the downtown area, which diverts resources away from neighborhoods, which creates a perception or a feeling in some communities of a lack of safety, a lack of police, whatever it is. And so, I would just encourage this council, I would encourage the future administration in this department to be very, very cautious about looking just at numbers and instead looking at what the overall objective is going to be. What is going to help our residents, help our visitors to live and work in a safe community. I think Salt Lake City is safe, but there are things that that differ in different areas. I worry when I start hearing about, well, we need to have more folks in patrol, but then we talk about putting police officers in this building, in addition to our paid security that we have. That takes one or more people off the streets who could be doing patrol. I worry about the mindset of the department. I think that there is, there's some concerns that, that officers aren't feeling heard, that they're not feeling like they're being listened to, and that doesn't help for, getting the best out of our officers. I think we need to look at morale and really put some emphasis on that. This is not going to be an easy fix. I think that the solutions that you've provided, so the information that you provided is very helpful. It certainly is the most thorough that I've seen in the 8 years that I've been here. So I want to thank you for that. And Chief Brown, I would just encourage you and your leadership and to continue the move towards a more community oriented policing. And if there are resources that are needed, let the council know. We've been in a situation where, we tried to get stuff for you and you were in a position where you couldn't tell us, yes, we need that. We've got to get beyond that. If we're going to really address this issue, we need to, have very direct, honest discussion, and the council needs to take that into consideration. So thank you all. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay. Mr. Maupin, Mr. Price, thank you very much for your thorough information. Chief Brown, as always, thank you for your leadership. The next item on our agenda is we're sticking with the public safety feeling, and that is our Funding Our Future quarterly update regarding public safety. Ben Lutke, as our council policy analyst, will lead this discussion. Chief Brown will be at the table to answer questions. Ben, I turn the time over to you.
As a reminder, the Funding Our Future for fiscal year 20 public safety, even though it has the broader public safety label, which the council has previously said includes police, fire, and 911 dispatch, for this current fiscal year, the funding did go to police uses. There's an attachment in your packet which has the green headings breaking down the updates for each of the items. And just a quick review, this included compensation adjustments for the additional police officers that were hired, as well as the existing civilian and police officers in the department. It included upgrades to the equipment. This includes next generation body cameras. And it also includes, I believe it's 13 civilian police personnel. These are crime lab technicians, victims advocates, analysts, as well as the social workers. I won't go into the details that are in the packet. I'll let the administration go through those.
All right, well, thanks again. Just real quick, I just wanted to start with the staffing overview as far as where we're at. Our funded FTEs are 570. We have 20 unfunded, making 590. As far as what we actually have in-house, in shop right now, is we're down 26 officers, and we're down the 20 unfunded, so we're down 46 officers right now. We're hiring in January 20th, or January of the next year, 25 to 30 entry-level officers. We're going to start a lateral class of approximately 7 officers. We'll do another entry-level class in June of next year, another entry-level class in September, and a lateral class probably somewhere in the summer or fall of next year. So that's a snapshot of where we're at. What we're going to try to do, we've gone to a continual hire and training academy situation so that we can always try to keep those numbers as much as we can. That's where we're at with our funding. As far as the first item on the program, our police salary adjustments, funding competitive police salary adjustments. This was the money that was used to go from an 8-step to 12-step, and that has been accomplished. And this also raised the compression between, if you give an officer the raise, then you have to keep the compression between officer and sergeant, lieutenant, and so forth. And so that has happened, and the total budget for that was $542,000. $542,000, yes. The new police officer, including the COPS grant, we have hired the 27 from FY 2019, and we have hired the 23 from fiscal year 20. They were all hired in October of 2019. I'm sorry, except for 2, right, Shelley? We'll make up 2 in the January hires of next year. That total budget for that was $3,225,000. The next was the additional police personnel to hire the new civilian personnel related to the increase of police officers. The majority of the positions have been hired. In fact, at one time we did have them all hired. These were records, crime lab, social workers, data analysis, but we've had a couple resignations. And so we've gone back to the list, and we'll continue the hiring process to keep those positions full because they're very, very important to what we do in that organization. The officer equipment costs, fund equipment associated with hiring of officers. Those are uniforms, everything they wear on their belt, their duty gun, all their duty gear and safety equipment is part of that line item, and we have continued to do that. We've received a balance of equipment and have issued most of it to the officers. That is at a cost of $609,000. The police salary fund, police salaries, this was in fiscal year 2019. We had an increase of 3%. That has been accomplished and implemented through fiscal year 18 and 19, and it allows the PD to be competitive in hiring and retention. The expense continues, and that is $2,927,000. The enhanced body camera initiative, the fund the funding was for the new body-worn cameras. A lot of our cameras, since Tim, we started, what, 6 years ago?
2012.
6 years ago. A lot of our cameras are becoming very old, antiquated. They don't work, or the wiring is breaking, the batteries are down. So this new program will allow us to buy the newest generation of body-worn cameras every 2.5 years on a continual basis. It'll also include the upload and the unlimited storage, which is huge because storage is a big ticket. And it has many of the auto turn-on features. A lot of times in the heat of a call or a situation, the officers don't have the ability to turn that camera on. A lot of times with the activation of lights, or if you draw a taser or a weapon, these cameras will come on automatically. Have I missed anything on that, Tim?
Mr. Chair, and so those are what these cameras will do, is that they're, as soon as a taser or a gun is pulled, it activates the camera.
There are a bunch of different features that we're still determining which ones we're going to purchase, but one of them is when you pull something out of a holster, one is when you turn your lights on, or you go over 60 miles an hour, or you open your door. You can configure them all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, Cindy Gus Jensen.
When we were speaking with the auditors yesterday, they even mentioned a feature where the cameras could be turned on for everyone that was sent out on a call.
It's a Bluetooth feature that if someone activates their camera, you can configure it to everybody within 50 feet turn on as well.
And what they were suggesting is that a more effective approach is some technology that allows, and if you would just consider it, that allows when the dispatch is made, and when as other officers join, the cameras are engaged at the time that the car is dispatched or the officer.
I'm not sure about that technology. We can certainly look into it.
Yeah, we could look at that. That's interesting.
I believe they said the connection was the computer-aided dispatch, the CAD system, allowing the activation of the body-worn cameras in the field. So it was based on who's responding to that call and activating all the responders based on the call.
Thank you for speaking English on my behalf.
Other questions or comments before the chief continues? Okay.
Oh, the body-worn cameras, those are going through the final procurement process for those. And then the last thing was the police hybrid sedan vehicles. To fund 100 new police hybrid vehicles, the vehicles have been ordered. Most of them are here. Fleet is, most of them are here. The cost of that is just over $4 million, and we're looking forward to having those and getting those deployed within our ranks.
If I could just add one thing on the body cameras, that we've been given direction to do an RFP on that. Purchasing is evaluated. There is a state contract in place, and they've evaluated that state contract was competitively bid. So that is our plan, is to use that unless we receive further direction from the council.
Okay. And with the new hybrid vehicles, has the opinion of your officers changed regarding those vehicles now that you actually have them?
No, I don't think the opinion's changed. The use of the vehicle is going to be a little different. We tried different cages, configurations within the car, and they were just too small to be used as a first responder where you're going to be arresting people and putting them in the back. So, but we have many assignments within the police department where we don't need a cage, where a marked car would be very useful, and we will deploy those. About half of those vehicles were going to be used within detectives, a great vehicle for detectives. But there are a lot of assignments within the organization that we could put those marked cars without the cage, and they could be very helpful to our needs.
Okay, and so how does that work with the existing patrol vehicles that are already, at over the end of life limit? I mean, the thought when we purchased these was that that would help with patrol. It'd help phase some of these other vehicles in. What does that do with? What does it do to the the vehicles that actually do need to have the cage in the back, that do need to have room for people to transport others?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's going to take some shuffling. Some of those SUVs that we have are in detectives or in different assignments. So if a detective was to get one of those new cars, that car would be wrapped and put back out into patrol. So there'll be some shuffling of cars, but we'll definitely put the cars where they can best serve our officers in the community.
Okay. Other questions?
Just for future
Councilmember
use, we're
Rogers.
not going to be using those for first responders, right?
No, they've discontinued that car. Ford doesn't make it anymore. The really nice thing is the SUVs will be available in a hybrid model next year. They weren't this year, so that is something to look forward to as we go.
Did we know when we bought those vehicles that they were going to be discontinued and that they?
I did not know that. Did you know that, Tim?
Did not know that.
No.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay. All right.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next, you can stay right there, Chief. The next is item number 3, which is an informational new Salt Lake City Police Department Mobile Command Center funding request. Ben, if you want to walk us through this, Sylvia Richards with council office is also here. And then, Chief, you and your team can address this.
Sylvia has an intro on this one.
Go ahead, Sylvia.
The police department is proposing to replace their mobile command center, or MCC, and they've indicated that their current model is outdated mechanically, structurally, and functionally, and that it would not be adequate to respond, would not be adequate for a public safety response. As a partial funding proposal, the police department has applied for and received 2 police grants and are proposing that the grant monies be used towards a new MCC. The Halfway House State Grant Award is $278,304, of which $150,000 is earmarked for the MCC. The grant funding use deadline for this grant is June 30th of 2020. The Justice Assistance, or JAG, Federal Grant Award is $333,520, of which $100,000 is earmarked for the MCC, and the grant funding use deadline for this grant is September 30th of 2022. The JAG grant is awaiting special certification to use funds for an MCC. Typical use of the mobile command center would include marathons, the LDS conferences, parades, and other community events such as Night Out Against Crime. Other uses would include significant criminal events, including active shooter situations, domestic terrorism, as well as disasters. According to the department, additional funding sources have not yet been identified. Council staff is bringing this to you because the council doesn't generally have an opportunity to discuss the grant funding during the grant process, and because there is a potential that general fund monies would be requested to fill the gap of up to $750,000.
Sylvia, so okay, that was my question. So the gap that exists is up to $750,000,
Up
or
to
is that
$750,000, depending on the model that the police department would choose.
Okay. Go ahead, Cindy.
And Sylvia has touched on this, but I just wanted to say it in a little stronger way that what we haven't understood about this is that typically these grant funds are received most years. Is that correct?
Yeah, right.
And so typically they're things that those grants purchase, not a mobile command center. So what we haven't been clear on is whether the things that they typically purchase, these grants typically purchase, would now be purchased by the general fund, or whether they might no longer be needed. Then the second thing is it's unusual to get to get a grant funding partially to fund something, have the grant deadlines coming up, and then have the council sort of it's helpful to have grant funding, no, don't get me wrong, but have the council kind of boxed in to having to come up with the general fund money in the next fiscal year or even before that. So So that was why we thought it was, council members asked about it to begin with, and then the more we looked at it, the more we were a little bit confused by it, because it isn't coming to you in a regular budget where you have the opportunity to weigh this priority against the other priorities that you have in a typical budget. So not to say it isn't needed. We don't, the police department can explain that, but just this is an unusual situation. I understand just this afternoon that the police department did have another funding source they suggested.
Correct, that's absolutely right.
We kind of need those ahead of time.
Yeah, and I apologize for that. That was information and funding that we didn't have until after our meeting this morning with Ben, and we went back and looked at more asset forfeiture is what we looked at, not knowing how much we had. And so in looking at the possibilities to fund this very much needed mobile command center, I was asking Ben if we could get a snippet from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation when Eddie's out in front of that Winnebago. That's kind of how we feel a little bit. Ours is 18 years old. It was never meant to be a mobile command center. It was outdated basically at the time we bought it. It was overweight. It wasn't meant to be the vehicle we needed, and many times we opt not to use it because it's so antiquated and many times doesn't work. But we looked at asset forfeiture, and we just received a one-time share from our Metro Narcotics Task Force of $362,000. So of our asset forfeiture, we feel that we should take $300,000 of that, apply it to the MCC. We have $150,000 on our halfway house grant. That could be applicable. The JAG grant, if we get the permission that we're asking for, with those three funding sources, that would put us at $550,000. That would buy us a very nice chassis and the basically shell of the vehicle. And then next year, in next year's funding, we could look at opportunities to use the halfway house, more asset forfeiture, possibly fund our future to build out the technologies within that MCC.
Yeah, Councilmember Mendenhall, and then Cindy Guss-Jensen.
How can we use halfway house dollars for a new mobile command center?
You want to explain the restrictions on that?
So the halfway house funding is limited to enforcing and safety regarding individuals who have been through the system. That's how it's worded. Since a lot of the people that we are dealing with in these crisis situations or these severe situations have been through the system, that's part of the qualification. Previous felonies, we see it a lot in our OI officer-involved critical incidents. They have previous histories that they've either been through the halfway house or the prison system.
But aren't there other police services that could be funded using that grant money that would specifically deal with that situation? I mean, I hear regularly, from residents in Andrews District about problems associated with halfway houses. Are there resources that could be used to help bolster some of the community policing around those halfway houses, which it sounds like is the actual intent of the grant?
So
we have in the past. That's how we bought our those.
The surveillance cameras, we buy surveillance cameras, pole cameras. We've done the UTV so we could run the tracks, run the trails, run the areas around the halfway houses.
Okay.
So those are like one-time uses. So this MCC kind of fits into that. It's a one-time use that would have some impact and some potential use for that area.
And we do fund overtime shifts around the halfway house areas and things like that.
Okay.
The other thing is that our asset forfeiture is right around $700,000. That money, we could look at, if we can't get that halfway house funding, we could use more of our asset forfeiture. But Chief Dow was going to explain what we kind of rely on that money for in our police services.
We don't want to use all of the asset forfeiture. In the past, we've used it for buying ballistic blankets and shields and things like that we haven't really planned for, but then the world changes and we need to figure out how to deal with some of those things. We've used it for training. We used it to pay for ICP to come in and do the study. We use it for consultants, things like that. So we want to keep that money, a little bit of that for asset forfeiture, not spend it all, because we also, now the banks have started charging us for subpoena replies and phone records requests and medical requests. So we've tried to keep a little bit of that asset forfeiture money for obtaining evidence is what we use that for. So we can use some of it, we just don't want to use all of it.
Councilmember Johnston.
I hear the need, and I don't disagree with the need. I'm having a really hard time with the halfway house piece, to be honest with you, Chief. I know the list of things that it can provide seem fundamental to the core issues we're trying to deal with in the city. The social work programs, both of them, mental health response team, patrol. I got 2 in my district. It's an issue. So help me understand why this funding from this particular pot that could hit those resources, it sounds like, versus anything else we could look at.
Well, many times, and we would definitely run this through the grant coordinators and those who would make the decision, but we've used it for, like I say, cameras, extra patrol shifts and things like that. But many times when somebody's gone barricade, or if there's a homicide or a huge investigation, or God forbid, we have something like Trolley Square. So a lot of those people have been through the system, and we would be deploying this mobile command center on a lot of those different operations. So that would be our nexus to using that type of funds.
My question isn't the nexus to say this is what we'd use the command center for, not sort of tying the command center to those people. My question is, these funds can be used for very specific purposes for, rehabilitation, frankly, mental health needs, things we've talked a lot about in the city. It feels the need is there. Mm-hmm. Why this funding versus anything else we could look at for funding this need, this mobile unit? Because we don't have enough for these needs right now. That's what I'm struggling with.
Right. I think we were just looking at possibilities to use funding, and that was one stream that we've been able to have a little flexibility in past uses. So,
Mr. Chair, I guess I have a kind of follow-up question to that. You talk about cameras, and District 1 has been hit hard with drive-bys, with, targeted homes for gang homes, and to hear that we only have 4 cameras, I believe, in the unit, and that 3 of them only work, that's my constituents and the residents and my neighbors would much rather see us have mobile cameras available so that we can deploy, so that they can actually feel safe and comfortable knowing that something is being watched on this particular home in a neighborhood. So, and I hear that we don't have enough of them, that we should be funding a lot more of these cameras. Is that true? Is that something, I've heard it before from CIU detectives and from others in the department.
They're a very good application of that money, so you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So I think from me as a standpoint, I would much rather see us be funding things where it is a direct impact to residents, specifically where they've been targeted and they feel threatened. And I have people that want to move because of it over and over again, and it's the same home over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So, and nothing's happened so far. And I know we can't talk about it, but for me and District 1, I feel like that's where we should be putting the money.
All right. Well, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Wharton.
What do we currently use to fill the need of this vehicle?
We have a motor home that was acquired in 2003 that has no technology in it that works and sometimes doesn't start and is overweight, and I guess that's about all I can say about it.
Okay. So this vehicle that we'd be applying for is a former military vehicle?
Oh,
no.
What is it?
It's a mobile home, but it's specifically designed.
Just a nicer mobile home.
Yeah, well,
and it's made for
I wouldn't
this
even say it's
purpose.
a mobile home. It's more of a designed mobile command center. That's what they build. It's on a Freightliner base. And it's built specifically for that purpose.
It's kind of like what UHP is using
Yeah.
or was using down at
Exactly.
Operation Rio
Right.
Grande, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yep.
So, Councilmember Valdemoros.
It's sounds like a lot of money for a vehicle, but I'm not expert in the price. But have you guys, how do you leverage all the grant money that you are able to get? Or is there any other grant that you can apply for that you can actually fund that vehicle instead of using this one? Have you guys thought maybe we should wait and apply for another one? Or have you talked to the mayor and said, these are our needs and this mobile, we've needed this mobile for 18 years now. Have you guys proposed another funding source for this mobile instead of this grant money that is very specific to service halfway houses and parole violator centers?
Yeah.
Because it feels like you're going to use it for not necessarily directly to that, like it's going to have other uses.
We've explored every opportunity for funding or grants. But we will continue looking for those things because there might be that needle in a haystack out there that we'd be able to qualify for and get, because we definitely need one.
Obviously, we need it, but I think that we also, like James said, we have other needs, so it would be helpful at least for me to understand what are your priorities. Like number one, let's say it's the cameras, or number one is the mobile thing, so that we can wrap our heads around really what's your priority, what you need to do your job, and also to serve our constituency as they see that it's needed.
Yeah.
That would be really helpful for me. But right now, I feel like from what we're talking about, there are other needs than other priorities than this at this moment with this grant opportunity.
Thank you.
So I mean, personally, I have no problem. I fully support, the department's request for this vehicle. I think that it does make sense. I don't like the way that you're going about doing it. Part of I think what we in the public need to understand is what the gives and the takes are.
Mm-hmm.
If we go ahead and use this grant money to fund this project or this vehicle, what are we not funding?
Sure.
I would say for the future, what I think would be helpful when you have requests like this, when you have something that is a long-standing item. I mean, obviously, this isn't something that just snuck up and as far as a need. This is something that you knew you needed. When we as a council say regularly, tell us what you need, let us know, what the issues are, let us figure out how to fund it. That's our job. And I think that while I appreciate the creativity in trying to figure it out, it worries me that, even if you do have a plan for something else, the optics of using a grant for halfway house, whatever, the optics are terrible. And so, for the future, just openly communicate that, this is a need. This is one of the requests that you have. You can propose that, that there are ideas for, we could use this grant, we could do this, we could do that. I mean, those kind of, proposals are great, but the council is the fiduciary body of the city. The decisions that we make, we have to weigh around everything else as well. Mm-hmm. And so, I think, my guess is that the opposition, or not the opposition, but the concern that you're hearing isn't related to the vehicle.
Yeah.
It's related to the mechanism that you're trying to fund it with. So I would just, please don't think that, that the council doesn't support, the project. It may, but it's the way that we're going about it is just a little bit weird.
Chief,
Councilmember
may I?
Mendenhall.
Yeah, sure.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I have to take responsibility for this because this was one of my brainstorms, trying to look at things we'd funded. We've done a lot of one-time use funding with the halfway house. We've done numerous cameras. We've done pole cameras. We've done maintenance. We've done solar panels on those. So in looking at this need that we've had for a long time, and not having an opportunity in budget process because we are limited on how many things we can ask for. We're always asking for reductions. Trying to be, and you said the word creative, right? Trying to be creative in how to offset some of the expense without it being a burden to the general fund. So we said, well, what if we can piece this together and then see, you know, we were wondering about CIP, we were wondering about general fund, we were wondering about sales tax, but we felt like we needed to have, I felt like, I'm sorry, I won't speak for the chief, some skin in the game. Like we're trying actively to offset some of the expense. And that's where the intention was. It wasn't to go around the system at all. So.
And I do appreciate that. I do appreciate the creativity. I just hope, I mean, it really is the optics that we're having to deal with. And it, you know, it's us, you know, finding out that this is what's happening when, you know, there may be other ways to have funded it that, you know, we could have done. I understand that your hands are tied. I really do. And I really hope that moving forward, the council administrative relationship is going to be different so that we can actually have those communications taking place without having you feel that your hands are being tied behind your back, that you can't ask you know, specific requests from the council to let us know what you need because you're being told not to. I hope that changes. Please don't take this as you know, me saying, you know, please don't be creative. I want you to be creative. It's just, it would have been helpful for us to have seen kind of the progression and to see if there are other forms or other resources that we could have expended to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the open communication has got to happen in the future.
Chair.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Just quickly, it reminds me of the new approach that the library administration has taken, apples to oranges in departments, I understand, but in looking at their capital asset management, coming up with a strategic plan for replacement of major capital infrastructure in their buildings, and in doing that, approaching their big purchases in a really transparent way that was presented to the community, work through their own, or to present it to the council and work through the community in a really public way. I think we will have a different approach to the city council and the administration jointly understanding those long-range needs as the department anticipates them. And what we've experienced over the last 4 years and probably even 6 years since I've been on the council is a council who's ready and willing to fund whatever request to almost to any extent that the police department puts before us without any long-range vision of what the department is anticipating. I appreciate you putting together a creative proposal. I think what is more appropriate given the relationship, which isn't going to change on January 6th instantly between the administration and the council, would have been to come to us with several funding alternative scenarios. This is one scenario. General fund is the other end of the spectrum. What else is in between? Give the council some options. Because part of the reaction you're getting, I think, has to do with some of the other items, particularly our frustration around asking for increased officers, offering you overtime for park patrols and coming back with, oh, we've already hired some police officers to work in this building and we're going to have you pay for that. This is what it has felt like to me. We're going to have you pay for that out of your request to increase park patrol. We didn't ask for more officers in this building. That budget amendment item was not about that. And here we are lumping, we're just going to close bathrooms and you're going to have more officers in this building into a patrol request that almost doesn't resemble what we have before us. That's the kind of, I think, frustration that we're going to have to take time to work out. But the transparency around what is coming down the pipeline and giving us a few funding scenarios, I think, is a way for us to start to feel like we aren't backed into a corner.
Sure. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Council.
The next item is item number 4, ordinance regarding budget amendment number 2 for fiscal year 2019-2020 follow-up. Just to be clear, budget discussion or budget amendment number 2, the majority of it was passed last week. There were a couple of items that were left over to fund tonight, or some discussion items. Those are the items in place. So those of you who are here for the portion of the budget that was passed last week, please know that we're not undoing that. That continues. These are just the remaining requests from budget amendment number 2. Ben Lutke, if you want to lead us off. Mary Beth Thompson, our Chief Financial Officer, is in the, it will join us at the table, as well as John Vike, the City Budget Director.
There are 4 remaining items open in the budget amendment for consideration by the council. The first 2 are both related to the grants, which include proposed funding for the Mobile Command Center that was just discussed. These are items G7, the JAG grant, and G11, the Halfway House grant. The JAG grant is federal. The Halfway House grant is state. So the question before the council is if you wanted to approve these 2 grants as proposed by the administration, which would include the funding for the Mobile Command Center, or if you would propose to approve the funding but for the amounts for the Mobile Command Center. This would likely require the department to go back and request approval to use the amounts for the Mobile Command Center for other uses. Or the third option, if the council would prefer to continue the discussion at a later date on these 2 grant items.
Okay. Questions for Mary Beth, John, or Ben about these remaining items? Councilmember Johnston.
Was there a timing problem with the grants, the 2 grants themselves, if we delay into next year?
On the federal JAG grant, the timeline is September of 2022, so there's significant time to request changes to the amount for the Mobile Command Center.
Okay.
The opposite is true on the state Halfway House grant. The deadline for that grant is the end of the fiscal year. I don't know how quickly a request can be processed for the Mobile Command Center funding and the Halfway House grant. So if that's a follow-up question, I don't know if Shelley is still in the room.
Ben, let me make a suggestion. Is that okay?
Yes,
I think based on the council's comments here tonight, that you could easily put this into January so that you could get a handle on it. We did find out that they can go back and request an amendment to these grants.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that might give you some time to get more information.
If there is time, I think more information makes sense. I just didn't want to delay if it was going to harm the application itself. So I'm fine delaying, Mr. Chair, until we can have further discussion on it.
And on these 2, we have had to go back and modify before.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Johnston. Other questions, thoughts, concerns, worries, hopes about budget amendment number 2? Yes. No, we're just talking about any, budget amendment number 2.
There are 2 other.
The remaining amounts in there, so the grants are a part of that for sure.
So there are the 2 grant items, and there are 2 other items as well. One of them is a placeholder, which is $100,000 for the police overtime, whether that's in parks or hotspots or if it's flexible, however the administration would like to use. The other one is item A10. Okay. A10 has 2 parts. It's $49,000, which is also for police overtime over patrol in parks, and $87,000 for the officer in this building.
Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
Sorry to yammer on so much tonight. I think what I heard last week and at your meeting and since is an interest in having the police overtime items that relate to hotspot and park patrol discussed during the month of January. That's what I heard from the last meeting. The police thing with this building, I think there's been several different ideas raised, and the council might want to discuss that a little bit. They first need to tell us, do you want to have those police overtime monies for all the other things moved into your January discussions?
Councilmember Fowler.
Yeah, I have a question about that. I mean, the decision to have an officer in the building has already been made. So if we don't fund the overtime, do you just sat in the building for free? I mean, it feels like we don't necessarily have a choice considering that the decision was made. And now we're coming to a budget amendment saying the decision was made and we need you to pay them.
They're going to have to cover that in their existing budget. If you don't give them budget, they will have to cover that in their existing budget.
So does that take, I mean, do we know where that would come from?
No, but we can go back and ask.
I mean, clearly, as I think Aaron pointed out in the last agenda discussion, seems frustrating. The transparency there seems frustrating. It seems frustrating to pay for 2 services in this building where we didn't have any. It's frustrating to me. And of course, the question is, if we don't fund this overtime for an officer who has, given us his time, whether I believe it's necessary or not, and which I don't think it's necessary, but that's my opinion, and we don't fund that, and they have to take it from somewhere else in the budget, then where else are they taking it from their budget? And what sort of resources are we missing out there, right? And so this is incredibly frustrating. Our hands are tied. In my opinion, my hands feel tied. And I am sorry, I should have spoken up when the chief was here, because it's certainly not it's none of the 3 of your fault. It's just, now we are forced into a corner.
So, council, what would you like to do with these remaining items? There are opportunities to defer discussion and decision until the next calendar year, so that we wouldn't fund any of these right now. You could go through and we could fund some of the remaining items tonight if we wanted to do that. What's the interest of the body?
May I,
Councilmember
Mr. Chair?
Fowler.
I think if it's possible and it doesn't delay, I think having a further discussion on the grants would be my preference. Just maybe if we can hold off on that budget amendment until January. Again, I think that because my hands feel tied with the overtime, and I feel like I would be amenable to allocating that money, but with some really strong intent language as far as asking the police department and the administration to look into some of the things that we have learned through this process, and some of the concerns that I think have been brought up. We had a meeting about the security and things that maybe weren't adequate, and how do we fix that? And I think there are ways to fix that without spending double our money here in this building, right? And I think that there's been some discussion around that. So because I feel like I certainly want an officer to be paid for sitting here, we've talked about allocating money for the parks, even though I think there needs to be more discussion there. I would be okay with funding those 2 items and then having some really strong intent language.
Okay, so here's an idea. Ben, how many items what are the remaining items on the budget opening?
There are 4.
Okay.
There are the 2 grants.
Okay, so what if we did this? Let's go through, Ben, if you want to take us through each of those, and we will straw poll each to decide whether or not we want to vote on them tonight or defer until next year. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, Ben, if you want to lead us through that.
Item G7 is the JAG grant. This is the federal grant, and it does include $100,000 for the Mobile Command Center. You could approve all of it or all of it but for the Mobile Command Center. So either.
Okay, what else does it include?
It also it's $333,000 total. The $100,000 for the Mobile Command Center. The remaining amount.
Okay, so here's a question for John and Mary Beth. If so, on a grant, instead of funding parts of it, would it be easier just to either vote on all of it or vote on none of it, or could we vote on pieces of it?
Well, it's easier for you to vote on all of it than on
Correct.
pieces of it, right?
Correct.
We can manage it on pieces, but it's more difficult to
Okay,
manage.
so if we were to defer, so on each of the grants, if we were to defer, are there things that would be held up in the weeks leading to that decision that would be problematic? Are you aware of anything, Ben? So let me pose this to the council. My recommendation would be if we're gonna vote to defer some of the grant, we ought to vote to defer all of it. Or if we're going to vote to fund it, we ought to fund all of it. I think piecing it out is just going to make things much more difficult than it needs to be. So, Ben, on the first grant, read that one more time, then we'll straw poll that.
So I just got the breakdown.
Okay.
The $333,000 for the federal JIG grant, it includes $35,000 for travel training for sworn and civilian staff, $11,700 for cell phone analysis software and a computer, $25,000 for less lethal shotguns. This is a new tool. $13,900 for security camera upgrades, $19,500 for a security system server, $8,300 for overtime specific to loud party patrols and pharmaceutical take-back events, $9,000 for outreach related to the Explorers program and the gang prevention program, the $100,000 for the mobile command center, $55,500, which is a Salt Lake County sub-award. So that amount is a pass-through from the city to the county. This is determined by the federal allocation formula. And there's another sub-award, which is an equal amount, $55,500, to the Unified Police Department, which is also determined by the allocation formula the federal government uses.
Okay, so the straw poll would be that we defer action on that grant until January of 2020. Thumbs up that we support that, thumbs down that we oppose it. Councilmember Mendenhall.
Have we made it explicit enough, or should we make it explicit in the straw poll what the delay is waiting to receive?
I mean,
Is it good enough?
I think that
Communicated?
I think that it needs to be. I think everything needs to be fully articulated to our staff, to Mary Beth and to John, so that they are fully up to speed on what is included in this. And then when the council takes action next month, hopefully you will all have the information that you need so that you're not flying blind on this.
Including alternative funding scenarios for the mobile command center?
No, I don't think. I think that probably complicates it too much. I think the mobile command center is something that hopefully the chief received the message that, we ought to have a broader discussion about that, and we can look at alternative funding sources for that. But this straw poll would just be to defer action on that one grant until January. Thumbs up that we support it, thumbs down that we oppose it. And that is 5-2, with council members Fowler and Rogers voting against. Okay, the next grant.
The next grant is the state halfway house grant, and I still haven't been able to find the breakdown on that one.
Okay, so we'll straw poll that we will also defer action on this item until January of 2020, dependent on receiving a full breakdown of the information received or requested in the grant. Thumbs up that we support deferring, thumbs down that we oppose it.
Wait, which grant was this?
This is the halfway house. And that is 6-1 with Councilmember Rogers voting against.
I have a question, Chair,
Yes.
on that halfway house grant.
Okay.
So what happens, so let's say we, in the future, we decide that we don't want to go with the mobile unit, so there's $100,000 in one and $150,000 on the other grant or something like that. Will we see a new proposal, what they're going to do with that remaining?
I would hope so, because I think that, there's, the clock is certainly ticking. This is only deferring action for a few weeks. So I would hope that there would be an alternative, recommendation on how to do that. But that's something that, I'll leave up to the police department, the administration, and our council staff.
Right, thanks.
Okay, Ben, what are the other items?
The two other items, there is I-1. This is the placeholder $100,000 for police overtime, whether it's in parks or hotspots or as flexible as the council wishes it to be for the administration. This was just a placeholder. It would come from fund balance. The other item is A10, which has the two parts.
Okay.
It's 49.
So let's do the police overtime first. So the straw poll would be that we defer action on police overtime until January of 2020. Is that clear? Yep. Thumbs up that you support that. Thumbs down that you oppose it. And that fails. Yeah. That is the vote. That is the vote. So the straw poll would be that we defer the overtime funding until January of 2020. The way that I read the initial vote total, unless you want to change your vote, Councilmember Valdemoros, is that that failed with 5-2, with Councilmember Valdemoros and Councilmember Wharton supporting the deferment. Okay, so that means we'll be voting on that tonight, or that'll be part of the motion tonight. Okay, go ahead.
The other question is the scope of flexibility on that $100,000.
The what?
The scope of flexibility, if it's specific for parks, hotspots, or as flexible as needs be.
Yep. Okay, so the straw poll would be that, that that the council's clear that overtime funding be used for parks and hotspot issues. Thumbs up that we support that. Thumbs down that we oppose it.
Sorry.
So that.
You're not deferring it?
No.
Oh, I see.
No. So again, let me see on that one. That is unanimously. We will support that tonight.
Okay. That leaves the last item, A10, and it has two parts. The $87,000 for the police officer in the city and county building. The second part is $49,000, which is proposed by the administration for overtime patrols in parks. So the $49,000 would be in addition to the $100,000 that just received the unanimous straw poll.
Okay. So before we vote on this, I mean, my hope is that the next administration will reevaluate that decision regarding a sworn officer spending time in this building, and that we instead look at beefing up if we need to, our contract with CBI or another vendor, but that we not have a sworn officer providing security in this building. That's something that I hope the next administration will take into consideration. So,
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson.
just to clarify, this funding is only through the end of this fiscal year to the end of June 2020?
Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So the
there-
discussion
so
would
there
come
is
up
time
this
to do it.
spring, and
yeah. But I think the discussion could take place quicker. But either way, this only goes through in this next fiscal year. So thumbs up that we vote to fund that piece tonight. Thumbs down that we oppose, or that we defer. Okay, and that is unanimous. We will vote on that tonight. Anything else, Ben?
So based on the straw polls, we are deferring action on the two grants until January. Staff will follow up with the police department with additional questions about those two grants.
Yep.
Voting tonight on item I1, the police overtime for parks and hotspots, $100,000, and on item A10, which includes the additional $49,000 overtime in parks and hotspots, and the $87,000 for the officer overtime in this building.
Yep, correct.
With the request for the legislative intent of reevaluating the service level of CBI and the need for the officer in the building.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Clear as mud, everybody? Okay, thanks for bearing with us as we work through that. Mary Beth and John, thank you both. Our next item is a resolution approval of funds for fiscal year 2019-2020, funding our future housing program applications follow-up. Allison Rowland will lead this discussion. Laney Eggerson-Goff, the Director of HAND, and Jen Schumann, Deputy Director of HAND, will also join us at the table.
Here to put this on. Yes, I'm happy to do that. Thank you. Let me get this out of the way. Let me grab this so we can get started. Sorry.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Thank you. As you well know, since this is the last meeting of the year, this is really an important opportunity for the council to decide the funding allocations specifically for FY20 for the Funding Our Future housing programs. The decision has been made, I believe, to delay deciding what to do with the fund balance, the $878,000 left over from FY19, until the start of the new year, since that will require a budget amendment. What we propose doing for this is to go through the spreadsheet, which I'll fix in a minute, to one by one, similar to how you do CIP, so that you can make a decision on each one of these funding allocations. I do want to mention I sent at about 10 to 5 the updated spreadsheets that include additional information from HAND that was requested during the last work session. You have copies of these, physical copies as well, and they're in your packets. Luckily, we have Lonnie and Jennifer Schumann and I think Barb Moreno here to help with any detailed questions you may have. We also will suggest the possibility of holding small group meetings, especially if there are any questions related to FY19 funding and potential FY21 funding. So questions that may implicate, no, that's not the right word, questions that may have repercussions for the FY21 funding in particular may be relevant, but we'd suggest small group meetings so that you can get to those. Does that sound like the right way to proceed, Mr. Chair? Okay. So the first item, thank you, while I'm getting this fixed, is road home funding for rental assistance. The mayor's recommendation was that it be funded at $100,000, and the category allocation, which was approved as part of the budget approval for FY20, was also $100,000. The question would be whether you'd like to keep it that way or if someone would like to make an alternative proposal.
Council, any thoughts? Okay, I think we're good.
So leave it that way or skip it?
Leave it that way.
Second is also the applicant was the road home. This is for rental assistance in the form of the House 20 program. The previous funding amount, the mayor's recommended funding amount is $125,000, and that was also the amount allocated in the FY20 budget.
Okay. I would say if anyone speaks up, then we can change it. If not, we'll, just proceed.
Mr. Chair.
Yep. Councilmember Johnston.
Would it be simpler?
I spoke too soon.
Would it be simpler for me to excuse myself at this point prior to going farther in? These are separate allocations, pots of money.
I'll leave it up to you.
You
probably should just.
The discussions may run over to each other.
Just for the optics and.
So I'm going to recuse myself, Mr. Chair, as I work for Volunteers of America, one of the applicants.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Johnston. We will have someone let you know as soon as we're done with this discussion.
So the next program category is landlord assurance and incentives, and the sole applicant was the Housing Authority of Salt Lake City. The mayor's recommendation was $350,000, and that matches the FY20 budget amount.
Okay.
The 4th, 5th, and 6th applicants are all in the program category of rental assistance, vulnerable populations, including school-age homelessness, and SPMI, which I am blanking on.
Severely, persistently mentally ill.
Thank you. The
Can I repeat that?
Yes, please.
Severely, persistently mentally ill.
Okay.
Yes.
So the funding category allocation was 200,000, and as you can see, the mayor's recommendation also sums to 200,000 among or between the three between the three applicants found here. Is there a suggestion on whether to deviate from the mayor's recommendation?
Councilmember Fowler is considering. Yes. Hearing nothing, Councilmember Valdemoros.
Did we ever get the response? I don't know if we had asked the question actually, but the 3 households with children, do we have like a number? Like this could be 4 people per household, therefore there's 12 people total, or?
And I believe it would just depend on the individual households that qualify for this program. Am I correct with that?
I don't have an actual.
Okay.
Right.
So basically, a family of 10 could come over and say,
Right.
here.
Or a family of 1.
I think the units are limited to three bedrooms is the largest that they have. So theoretically, you could have 2 per bedroom, depending upon the age of the children. You know what I mean? So there's that composition that has to
So
take.
3 bedrooms, 2 people, 6, so 6 people total.
It
per
could be
household.
6.
It could be.
That's not very likely, to be fair, but it could be a family as large as 6.
6, so 6 times 3, 18. Like that's our
Yeah.
hope. Okay.
Potentially.
The other thing council members may want to consider is, again, you'll have the opportunity to review the unspent funds from FY19 in case you're interested in boosting any of these amounts, any of these funding amounts. So this, and there will be several other possibilities because of that 878. So we good with the mayor's recommendations?
Yes.
Thank you. Next is prevention and elimination of housing discrimination category. The 2 applicants are Community Development Corporation of Utah and Salt Lake Community Action / Utah Community Action. This is one that Councilmember Mendenhall had mentioned in a previous meeting. She preferred, and that's why it's marked in yellow, she preferred to dedicate all 300,000 of the category allocation to community action rather than the mayor's recommendation, which included 76,000 of that 300,000 to go to a CDC Utah program.
Okay, Councilmember Mendenhall.
How many phone calls a month are they getting at the Community Action Network?
May I?
Yes.
400.
400 a month, and the program there is working. It's helping people avoid eviction.
Enough.
There's just not enough money. And I think that the concept with the CDC is interesting. I asked in the previous meeting for some greater evidence in future applications of that mode working. It's really hard to build community leaders with a transient renting population. That's part of the definition of being a renter. And so I would like us to put all 300,000 towards the program that's already working and having to deny people the kind of funding support that they need to maintain their housing or get back into housing.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I don't disagree with Aaron on this. Also, I think we can have James back in here, can't we? Aren't we done
Andrew?
with the...
Andrew.
Or Andrew.
Angie.
Anyway, this might be one of those things, the CDC Utah one, maybe something that we star to talk about with the 876,000 that we're going to talk about in January. And for now, since we're going to adopt this year, put all of that, I would be amenable to putting that other 76,000 into Salt Lake Community Action and funding that fully, and then come back to the CDC Utah program when we're in future.
Another.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead on it.
Well, like my question here is, so I don't see exactly how these programs work, so, which it's okay, but just simple math. CDC is allocating $152 per person because they want to serve 500 people, and then Solid Community Action will serve 50 people, and so they will pay about $4,480 a person. So that's like the math here. I'm not sure what's going on, how these programs are deployed. What does this mean? Why is one so low and then one so high?
Correct me if I'm wrong, ladies, but the CDC program isn't to connect people with actual funds to maintain their housing or get into housing. It's to educate people on the programs like the Community Action Program
Okay.
that could help them do that. So it's an education program. It's not a maintenance of housing program. Am I correct?
That's my understanding.
What?
But this one says the program says prevent and eliminate housing discrimination. So my head goes
It's
to.
renters' rights, knowing your renters' rights.
Rights. Not necessarily housing repairs, like per se.
Not at all.
Not at all, like, okay.
But what are the consequences of delaying creating this organization? Do we
It
know?
would be a new organization.
Right, but is there some need to like create this, like,
Today?
yeah, like, and is this organization going to engage in like lobbying or anything? It's only about educating.
It's primarily about educating and creating leaders within the community. If they were not able to receive this funding, they would continue looking for other funding sources and continue the partnership with CDCU in looking for that.
Other thoughts, or?
I think one, I don't know this one personally as well. I think one of the concepts is tenants' rights are probably stronger and more universally known if they're peer-to-peer. And having an organization that's not a professional organization per se educating folks, but having a peer-driven sort of grassroots organization that could advocate for one another and disseminate the information on that level could be very powerful as it grew. This is more of a pilot, though, to start that process, I believe, if I'm accurate.
Yes.
We do have a need for tenants' rights. I think clearly that's a question. I think here it's a question of do you fund it now in this pilot project or not, based on the other needs this year.
Mr. Chair, I mean, again, if we come back, there's this $876,000 that we plan on talking about next year. So, I mean, if we come back with potentially the ability to fund it fully, to have them be a little, I mean, I agree with Anna in the sense that I don't really know anything about the program. I've looked at the application a little bit, but maybe if it's something that we have a little bit more information of in the future, then it's like, yay, we have this money and you can have some of it, right? I mean, is it going to harm the organization and the ability to continue this if we delay it a couple of months, is my question.
And from what I've heard and understand, the answer would be no, that they are searching for other forms of funding or other sources of funding. The other possibility, if you delay the funding for or concentrate the $300,000 in the community action program, is that we can have small group meetings to really tease out what is involved in the Community Development Corporation proposal.
Currently, there's no organization. This would start the organization brand new, correct?
Right.
So there's not a current operation needs to be funded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Mendenhall.
I just want to reiterate what I talked about before, that I think the Community Action said that it's an average of $7,000, or that's the typical amount of money it takes to help bridge the gap on people who are facing eviction and be able to maintain their or stabilize their housing. So what we're talking about with $76,000 is approximately 11 households. 11 additional households that the Community Action could stabilize housing on, which at $7,000 per household is a bargain compared to what we end up investing getting families out of shelter and back onto their feet.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Councilmember Fowler.
I would propose a straw poll that we move all of the 76,000 currently for the CDC Utah proposal into the Salt Lake Community Action proposal.
Okay, straw poll recommended by Councilmember Fowler. Is everyone clear on that?
Yeah, could I make a comment in addition
Sure.
to it? I think I would encourage, if there's extra funds unallocated at the end of this process, that it goes back to that pilot project. I think it could yield a massive amount of support over the years going forward. That tends to be government funded, essentially.
Does that work? All right. Thumbs up that we support moving the remaining to total $300,000 to the Community Action Program. Thumbs down that we post that. And that is unanimous.
The next program category is homeownership down payment assistance. There were 3 applications: Community Development Corporation of Utah, International Rescue Committee, and Salt Lake Neighborhood Housing NeighborWorks Salt Lake. The mayor's recommendation was to split funding between the 3 programs that applied, and the council can decide differently if they like. Is there anyone who would like to
Nope,
change the
not
mayor's
hearing
proposal?
anything. I think we're good.
Okay. The final category is the emergency rent assistant category with $400,000 in the FY20 category allocation. 3 applications. The mayor suggested concentrating funding in First Step House with some funding also to IRC, and to not provide any funding for YWCA Utah. Would anyone like to?
Any changes to that recommendation?
And this is emergency rent assistance.
Councilmember Rogers.
Can you tell us again about the YWCA? They have basically an apartment complex on property, and currently it is completely empty.
Not completely,
but a lot of it is vacant, correct?
Correct.
And this would go to 36 households for 6 months.
Correct.
I'd love to see us fund this.
Okay.
And again, for any of the potential changes that you may wish to make, there is that $878,000 in FY19 funding that you may be able to compensate or move around as you prefer.
Okay. Does anyone have any other suggestions?
I do have a question.
Councilmember Fowler.
When do we anticipate having the conversation about that 876,000?
It will likely be January, as far as I know, that we need to have a budget opening so that those can be approved.
Okay. I mean, I would be okay supporting how it is proposed right now with hopefully a really strong and clear message that I would love to see this YWCA program funded. I think that's huge. So I just kind of asterisk that, put my name by it.
Okay.
And James's name. And mine. So.
Let's fund it.
Yeah.
Great.
All
Okay.
right.
Well, thank you all. Any other?
Time. Thank you very much.
Any other items? All right. We are going to, we pulled the funding our future quarterly update on transit from our
Chair.
agenda.
This is your last meeting in here, and Aaron's last meeting as well, and I just wish we could be talking about that because people don't understand the routes, that the actual population has just gone skyrocketing with the new routes. So,
Yeah.
you know, you two here, these funding the future silos, we did something pretty creative.
That was fun. Definitely
So
something to be
thank you
proud
for
of. So.
help creating that west-east side connection with more routes to come online. So.
Well, thank you. The final items on our work session agenda, we have a few board appointment interviews. The first is Allison Genovese for the Community Development and Capital Improvements Programs Advisory Board. Allison, if you'd join us up front. Tell us a little bit about why you are interested in the CDCIP board and why you would like to join.
Sure, thank you. I'm fairly recent transplant to Salt Lake. I've been here about 3 years. I have a background in corporate sustainability, human rights, environmental disclosure, as well as community engagement, and I have my master's in public administration and nonprofit management. So I felt as though when I looked around as ways for me to get involved in my new community, that this was a good fit with my background and areas of interest.
Great. Any questions for Ms. Genovese?
I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your willingness to serve. Your name will be on our consent agenda in our next meeting.
Okay.
You don't need to stick around.
Okay.
Everything's great. We really appreciate your willingness. That information about the consent agenda goes to all of you who are going to be interviewed today. Again, you are welcome to stay, but you won't need to. So thank you for your willingness to serve.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I look forward to it.
Our next interview is with Michaela Bukala for the Arts Council Board. Ms. Bukala, again, tell us about why you are interested in the Arts Council Board.
Yeah, so I have been here in Utah for 5 years and work for Sundance Institute. And I have really seen a lot of what we are able to do up on that kind of shiny hill in Park City. But I feel like for me, I want to see what we can do to give back to the community here down in Salt Lake. I have a background in theater and a master's in performance studies. And so for me, one of my biggest passions is arts education and community engagement and how we can provide access and particularly access to communities that are often marginalized, don't know how to get into the door, are often even communities with disabilities. So for me, something that I take great pride in is yes, I work for this great organization, but often this great organization has a fancy title and kind of frightens a lot of people. That is, I think, the important people we need to get in the room for engaging with arts, particularly at a community level. So I'd love to give back, and now that I've been here 5 years, I feel like it's time to kind of turn my attention to ways that I can find to dedicate my time where I'm passionate about, and this would be one of them.
Thank you, Ms. Bukala. Any questions or comments?
May I, Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Fowler.
Ms. Bukala is in my district, and so I am excited to have somebody representing our Sugarhood over there on the Arts Council, and I have this crazy feeling that I'm going to be trying to recruit you to help with next year's Backyard Bash that the Sugar House Community Council puts on.
Perfect.
So be aware.
That sounds like a
and
great
thank
plan.
you. Thank you for your service.
Appreciate it.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
So your name will be on the consent agenda next door.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time.
Brandon Dew will be is being recommended for an appointment to the Citizens Compensation Advisory Committee. Mr. Dew, thank you for joining us on fairly short notice.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And your willingness to serve. So tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are interested in the CCAC.
I think I know most of you, but for those that don't know me, my name's Brandon Dew. I'm the president of the Central Utah Federation of Labor. Also, my other full-time job is with the operating engineers, representing men and women in the construction industry. And the reason why I'd be interested in this council is I think that I could bring a unbiased opinion on the compensation for the employees in Salt Lake City itself. And whereas that's what I do on a daily basis, I think I can help. I know that there's been a struggle at times finding quality people to come to Salt Lake City, and I think I could bring a broader aspect from a community basis to help get that done in Salt Lake City and be able to attract top talent to the city.
Great. Any questions for Brandon?
I'm really looking forward to you representing on this board. I think that you'll bring a very good voice to, as you know, some of the negotiations and to some of the ideas that we as a council really want to see improve and be better for our employees, our city employees in here. So thank you.
And Brandon, I want to thank you as well. It's been a few years now since the council has worked to have broader representation on the CCAC. It's important for our working families in the city to be fully represented, to have the committee not just understand human resources, but also folks on the committee understand labor, the importance of labor negotiations. And so thank you for your willingness to serve. I'm very confident that you'll excel on that board. So
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Greg Sanchez is being appointed to the Transportation Advisory Board. Hi, Mr. Sanchez.
Hi, council members.
Just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in serving.
So I'm a resident in District 1. I am a transportation engineer by profession, and I feel like this will be an opportunity for me to implement what I know, what I've learned throughout school in my community, and I think it'll be great for me to be able to share my ideas with others. I've already attended a Transportation Advisory Board, and I like the way we are able to discuss. And I think being able to represent from the career side or from the profession side, I'll be able to help maybe guide some decisions or help other residents understand why things are done, or if anything, understand what we need to do better in this city and see how I can help. And I just want to serve you doing what I know best.
Great. Thank you. Questions for Mr. Sanchez? Councilmember Valdemoros.
Thank you so much for your time. I'm excited that you're here. I'm excited that you can be an ally with us when we're trying to communicate with our communities and maybe Hispanic communities, where we can help understand how the city works and the decisions that are made in these advisory boards. And also, as we all try to get involved in different boards or the council, having you here is another bonus point for the cause of saying we Hispanics need to participate more. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Your name will be on the consent agenda in our next meeting. You're welcome to stay. Thank you. And our final interview tonight will be for Gabriella Knudsen. Hello. So you now know the drill.
I'm sorry?
So you know the drill now. So just tell us about yourself and why you're interested in the Bicycle Advisory Committee.
So I am a student of environmental studies at the U. So I do love the environment, and public policy is something that I'm looking forward to do after I'm done with my schooling. So I know the Bicycle Committee, it's a lot to do with the environment, creating policies, and I think would be a great experience for me to do that.
Great. Any questions or comments?
Okay.
Thank you for your willingness, and we really appreciate your service.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and with that, let's see, Jackie Teal is not going to be here tonight, so we will send her application back to the administration for additional review. So that is it for the items of business that we have on our work session agenda. We do have announcements from our executive director.
I'll go quickly. Your council policy regarding travel for out-of-town training requires that we check in with you if we have any council members interested in out-of-town training other than the few that are listed in your policy. For the past 3 years, the council has sent people to the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference. Councilmember Andrew Johnston has requested to go to the conference coming up in February.
Okay.
I'd like to come back though too.
Okay.
Yes, well.
I support it. Do you need it? You don't need a thumbs up or anything, do you? Yeah.
Okay.
We all vote to send Andrew permanently. No.
You received the annual calendar at your last meeting, and it's here again for your review. This isn't your last chance. The Recorder's Office will publish it, but you will have an opportunity after the beginning of the year, as well as throughout the year, to amend it. It's always best if we get as many of the adjustments that are needed into the calendar from the beginning so that people can plan their schedules, and also bond advisors can use it reliably. So let's see. Then a legislative action request. This is from Councilmember Valdemoros, and we have since learned that Councilmember Wharton is also very interested in it, and there were a couple of others. And this is complaints that the council members have received about not being allowed to put artificial turf in their park strips in some cases, and then in their front lawns in other cases, or instead of front lawn. So there's a lot of information the administration has provided, but we don't know whether they have taken a current look at it with the most recently developed materials and ability for it to drain and that type of a thing. So this, if the council approves this, it would go to the administration and ask them to report back on the findings after a holistic review. Are we okay?
Okay. Yep, you're good.
Okay, that's a yes, okay. And then legislative subcommittee, this is something that the council members spoke about previously, but did not take a straw poll about, and that is if the legislative subcommittee consists of the chair, the vice chair, and the immediate past chair. And immediate past chair is there for continuity's sake. The question is whether you would like to specify that the immediate past vice chair serves in addition to the chair, current chair and vice chair, so that that continuity is addressed.
Thumbs up that we support that. Thumbs down that we oppose it. And that is unanimous.
I think that's it.
Okay. The only announcements from chair, vice chair. Yeah. So, well, that's later. So, anyway, thank you all, Aaron. Final meeting in this room. So, anyway, thank you all, and we'll talk more. Okay.